Hey, it's SchezzWho time. All right. Don't forget the Dissent Agenda, a great local podcast here in Virginia Beach that is run by Melissa Lucasen and Cody Connor, and their StreamYard account is what I'm using for my show. So definitely look up the Dissent Agenda. Don't forget, for your insurance needs in Hampton Roads, Farley Perkins at the Farley Perkins Agency. If you're looking for a great dinner tonight, Ellen's Homestyle and Barbecue Express here in Portsmouth and Virginia Beach. And afterwards, for a nice dessert, the LG Sweet Boutique on High Street in Portsmouth. I recently did taxes with the tax lady, Sandrika Blount, so got her contact information there. You can definitely use her services. She'll help you out. And last but not least, don't forget the Black Swan Mindset. The Chronicle is a great podcast and Substack run by Andrea Dixon-Chesviner, the awesome and talented, lovely Andrea Dixon-Chesviner, my wife. So for the better part of a decade, I've been looking at election results and being slightly relieved when I see Democrats win over Republicans. But in that time span, I've come to realize Democrats, sort of as a collective, largely don't otherwise want to do too much. They want to make sure Republicans don't win, but they also get in office and sort of conservatively act. The true conservative party in the U.S. is the Democratic Party. And on one hand, we observe Republicans descending into a fascist love fest. And when they take hold of power, well, we see what's going on with all the death and destruction. On the other hand, there's a decided growth in the American left wing of politics, and the Democrat establishment is scared they're losing control of the winning opposition narrative. To expand on this thesis, I'm bringing on a powerful voice in that leftward push, former Seattle councilwoman and challenger in one of the most dynamic congressional races in the country, Kshama Sawant. I will bring her on right now. How are you, madam?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. And I want to start right in here with the congressional primary in Washington's 9th District. It's pretty impressive. It's a top two primary system, jungle primary, I believe it's called, where all party candidates share one ballot. And the top two finishers advance to the general election regardless of affiliation. The primary is August 4th, and you've been on many shows of late, so I'm honored that you're stopping by SchezzWho. You have a good swell of momentum right now. So if you could break down what you're right now seeing on the ground.
Thanks so much for having me. As you said correctly, it is a jungle primary, meaning regardless of party affiliation, all candidates are in the same primary, and the top two vote getters get into the November election. And so even though I am running as an independent socialist, I am in the same primary as the Democrats and the Republicans, and my main opponent is 29-year incumbent Democrat Adam Smith, who has been voting to fund the genocide in Gaza. He voted to create and fund ICE. He has actually voted to fund ICE repeatedly to the tune of nearly $115 billion. He has also voted to slash Medicare and Medicaid by hundreds of billions of dollars, and he has voted to cut funding for public housing by tens of billions of dollars. And in contrast, my campaign, my socialist, anti-war, pro-worker campaign, we're calling for an end to all military aid to the Israeli state, an end to the genocide, and for a permanent arms embargo on the Israeli state. And also we're calling for demands like free healthcare for all funded by taxing the rich. And hopefully we can talk more about the demands. But as far as how things are on the ground, it's precisely because these demands are so popular among American working people that this campaign has attained momentum on the ground, despite the fact that we have faced an almost entire corporate media blackout. And even among the self-described progressive podcasts, it's been only a few select ones that have featured our campaign. And so despite all these obstacles, we've been able to gain momentum because the demands are popular that we're running on, and also because working people are very energized and very heartened by my track record. I was on the Seattle City Council for 10 years, and we made Seattle the first major city to win the $15 an hour minimum wage. We won inflation increases, so we now have the nation's highest minimum wage at $21.30 an hour. We've defeated billionaires and corporate landlords repeatedly, and that track record really earns the faith, earns the trust of working class people who are fed up of being sold out by politicians. And you mentioned, Democrats and Republicans both having completely betrayed the working class. So that's really giving us momentum in this race. But we can't be, I'll just say though, we can't be complacent, because we have the billionaires, the Zionist lobby, all of this money that is being directed towards Adam Smith, our main opponent. And that's why we are fighting to get out the vote right now. So we are in a massive get out the vote mission at this moment.
Massive, and it's needed, because August 4th is when that end of the primary day comes around. So it's within a week. So all those watching, definitely get informed as quick as possible so you get out there and vote. Now, you and I are both going to share critiques of the Democratic Party here, and nonetheless, they're political creatures, so they read the tea leaves, and there's a momentum that you might sense from the Democrat Party that they're going to try and code left as much as possible, but still not betray the donors' wishes on their end to be kind of conservative, observed Adam Smith. Adam is a long-term congressman. He's been successful at attaining office, but he doesn't have strong enough policy ambition. And on his website, he literally says, Adam's approach is realistic goals and expectations, delivering practical solutions. But to me, the way that's worded is deliberately dilutes expectations. It's telling voters to not expect him to deliver on what they actually need. He's sort of trying to tell muted policy that could be agreed with Republicans is practical. You, on the other hand, you mentioned it already, you have a demands section. Talked about why you're saying it's demands as opposed to priorities.
Yeah, if I might just start with your the first part of your question, which is the way you described Adam Smith. And I think that is really important for your viewers to understand that Adam Smith, the way he talks, speaks, not only is it, as you said correctly, it's specifically geared towards not generating any types of expectations of ordinary people, but it's really, it's meant to mute the expectations, as you were suggesting. But it's even worse than that, right? It's much more insidious than that, which is that he talks about practical solutions. I mean, this guy is one of the 5 remaining House Democrats who voted for the war on Iraq way back when. And he has the blood of 1 million Iraqis on his hands. He has voted for tens of billions of dollars for the genocide in Gaza. He continues to fund the genocide in Gaza. I mean, it has been unspeakable horrors that have been perpetrated against the Palestinian people. And he is one of the 2 lead co-sponsors of war funding bills that, and 2 of those, which I should mention, one in December of last year, so just months ago, where he, as the ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee, co-sponsored a bill alongside Mike Rogers, a Republican, who is the chair of the House Armed Services Committee. I mean, so, this is a bipartisan bill, Democrats and Republicans together, proudly co-authoring bills that together give money to Trump. So that bill in December that Adam Smith co-authored, that bill gave Trump $906 billion for war, which is the money Trump has been using this year for his disastrous war on Iran. So keep in mind, the war on Iran is a bipartisan war. But as if that wasn't enough, Adam Smith co-authored another war funding bill with Mike Rogers just last month, which is another $1 trillion of war for Trump, and also escalating weaponry for the Israeli state. And also one of the most horrific aspects of this bill is fusing the US and Israeli military. So this is the kind of guy we're running against. He is a war criminal. Adam Smith should really be on trial for war crimes. The least price he needs to pay is to be thrown out of office. And that is why our campaign is so crucial and so historic, because this is the strongest ever challenge that Adam Smith has ever faced in his 29-year career, which I should mention is longer than many of my campaign volunteers have even been alive, because it's a very young campaign. And so and it's time that Adam Smith was driven out of office. And like you said, one of the one of the fundamental distinctions between my campaign and really not just Adam Smith, but basically every campaign, virtually every campaign in this midterm election, is that as we're not trying to mute expectations. We actually want working people's anger to be sort of harnessed towards winning concrete victories. So our campaign is run on concrete demands. And as you say, we call it demands because anything that we can win as working class people in the capitalist system is something that we are going to wrench as concessions from the hands of the billionaires and multimillionaires, because they're not going to just give us things to make our lives better just because they have the goodness of their heart or anything like that. Because if that were the case, then we wouldn't be in this situation, where trillions of dollars are being spent to slaughter ordinary people in other countries, while in the richest nation in the world, half of American households aren't able to afford groceries. This wouldn't be the status quo if isn't how the capitalist system was meant to function. This is how capitalist system functions, which is the ruling class, the billionaires and multimillionaires. They have all the wealth and the power because they rob us of the wealth that we generate through billions of workers going to work every day, and they use that wealth and power doubly against us, not only stealing any decent standards of living away from us, but also in the political system. During elections, they make sure that their candidates are usually the status quo always wins. And so this campaign is the exact opposite of that. And that's why we are saying that, in fact, it's the exact opposite of the kind of campaign that Democrats run, which is that we are saying that if we want to win any of our demands, like ending all military aid to Israel, like getting a permanent arms embargo on Israel, or like winning free healthcare for all funded by taxing the rich, or national rent control, then in fact, not only do we need to win the election, which means, first of all, we need to go to the November election by becoming one of the top 2 vote getters in the August 4th election. In addition to that, we need working people to get mobilized alongside us. And that's also how we won the nation's highest minimum wage when I was on the Seattle City Council, by using my office to mobilize working class people.
And I also want to throw up here on the screen your website, which is specifically on the demand section right now because it is that important. They are worthy of demanding. And the next topic I did want to go into is one of the most important ones for me, of course, is Israel and Palestine and how the United States is involved with that. And you have stark differences between you and Adam here. So you have a little bit of the floor here. Tell us specifically where you contrast with Adam on this, Israel and Palestine.
Yeah, this could not be a bigger contrast, actually, because Adam Smith is not only one of the Democrats who has voted for war after war after war, and now funding the genocide in Gaza, funding the war on Iran, and all of Trump's wars, but he is a general among the warmongers. Like I said earlier, he is not just a vote for wars, a reliable vote for wars. He has been a leader, one of the instigators of war funding. So that's why he has been the ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee, which means that the Republicans have the majority on the House Armed Services Committee. So the chair of the committee is Mike Rogers, who's a Republican. But then in the Democratic side, Adam Smith is the most leading Democrat as far as wars and armed forces are concerned, and that is why he is what we call the ranking member. So in other words, he is the second most powerful guy in that committee, which decides how much, the proposals for how much money to allocate for war. And so in that sense, he is one of the main instigators of war. He is bankrolled by war profiteering corporations and billionaires and multimillionaires, and all these dystopian corporations like Palantir, Lockheed Martin, Kratos, all of these corporations that directly profit from war and carnage and bloodshed. These guys, all these billionaires and multimillionaires, they all bankroll Adam Smith. He's also bankrolled by AIPAC and other Zionist lobby groups. And our campaign is a stark contrast to all of that. This is a revolutionary, socialist, anti-war campaign. I have a long track record of using my elected office against war. For example, in 2014, when I was on the Seattle City Council, and there was a massive escalation at the time by the Israeli state of violence against the Palestinian people. At that time, it's actually even more unusual because very few politicians at that time were speaking out against Israel and against the violent occupation and the apartheid state of Israel. And so our track record goes back that far, where in 2014, I published a letter publicly urging the Obama administration at that time and US Congress, which obviously included Adam Smith at the time, urging them to stop funding Israel. And we know what's happened since then. They have continued funding Israel. And then, in my final month on the city council in November 2023, I actually won the nation's second and strongest resolution against the genocide in Gaza, because keep in mind, the genocide had already begun at that time in October. And so rather than take it easy in my last month on the city council, I actually, one of the biggest battles we launched through my office was to win that resolution against the genocide. And I call it a battle because even though every other council member on the Seattle City Council was a Democrat, it was the Democrats who opposed us. So I was one independent socialist, all others were Democrats, and the movement that I built, it had to fight against the Democratic Party and force them to vote yes, which they were forced to because of the strength of the movement we built.
And that fighting against the Democrat Party also plays a lot of parts in some other important topics to me and you as well. I watched Adam on Breaking Points in that interview recently, as many have. And at first, it's worth noting that ICE isn't mentioned on Adam's website. And second, he tried very hard with Crystal to defend the very concept of ICE with her. Scorning her that defunding it even has bad optics. So much like my thesis tonight, on one hand, Republicans are in love with ICE and they love having their own Gestapo, but Democrats are offended at bad ICE reputation. They kind of want to polish that turd. You want to eliminate ICE. What is the best option and why?
I mean, stepping back from the immediate demands, which I'll come to in a second, I think it's important to recognize that the problems that are facing working people, regardless of our nationalities and ethnic origins and so on, stem from the capitalist system. So in other words, when people from, for example, Latin America, Mexico, and other countries end up migrating to the United States, for the most part, that happens because working and poor people are made, their lives are made impossible because of US imperialism in their home countries. And because they face such difficult conditions in their home countries, in their home regions, they're forced to migrate. And, because nobody's going to undertake arduous journeys with so much dangers and, fraught with all this danger and split up their families unless they were desperate. And so, in other words, it is, first of all, capitalism and imperialism, which is all a system that benefits the billionaires and multimillionaires, that system putting people in conditions, desperate conditions, which forces them to migrate. And then when they come to the United States, they face another series of hardships. And it's important to note that the capitalist class, which is the billionaires and multimillionaires, it is not just inanimate objects, not any inanimate object. These are individual billionaires and multimillionaires who specifically and systematically use a divide and conquer strategy, meaning pitting American-born working people against immigrant, foreign-born working people, and telling American-born working people that, hey, if your life sucks, if you don't have good, decent jobs, if you don't have safe neighborhoods, if you don't have your living standards in such a way that you can at least pay your rent and you don't, you have healthcare, you can put food on the table. If your life sucks, then go and blame immigrant people, then go and blame Black people, basically creating pockets that divide and conquer the working class so that we start fighting against one another and lose sight of the fact that really all of us are in a desperate situation because the billionaires and multimillionaires are exploiting us all, maybe at slightly different levels for each other. So in other words, just to say something very specifically, one way in which the billionaires keep wages low for American workers is by having a more exploitable immigrant workforce, which works, who end up working for, who have no choice but to work for even lower wages. But the lower wages of the immigrant workers, especially the undocumented immigrants, are a specific and conscious strategy that the ruling class uses, the bosses use, in order to keep the wages of the American born workers also low. So I'm trying to explain that in reality, the interests of American born working people and immigrant working people, our interests are tied together, and we have to together as a working class, form class based solidarity with one another and fight against the bosses class. And that's why our campaign, as you said, as you were just showing on the screen, we're calling to shut down ICE and the detention centers, to stop all the deportations. But in addition to that, it's very important to point out that my campaign is also fighting for a living wage, public sector living wage jobs guarantee, also funded by taxing the rich. Because why should it be? I mean, we shouldn't have an economy where jobs are so scarce, especially decent paying jobs are so scarce, that we are all pitted against one another while the bosses rake it in. I mean, think about it. The top 1% has $55 trillion worth of wealth, and the rest of us are scrounging the bottom, fighting over crumbs. Instead, we should, unite and fight against the bosses, not against each other. And if we fight for a public sector living wage jobs guarantee, it would mean that we could actually generate decent paying living wage unionized jobs that could build public schools, that could build bridges, repair our infrastructure, that could create construction jobs, and that could actually provide, finance the training, also provide funding for training for various jobs, whether it be nurses or doctors or other types of teachers and all the other jobs that our society needs.
Adam Smith is also running on lowering rents. So this is and building more housing. So this is another way he tries to sound a little bit more to the left than he might actually be. You're running on national rent control and building public housing. So explain how not only are you distinct, but how yours is better.
Yeah, first of all, let's note that this guy has been in Congress, as I said, for 29 years. And he has been one of the, not only the instigators of war funding, but he has also been what I would call a neoliberal Democrat. So, in other words, in the wake of actually, one of the first things he did after he was elected was vote to slash hundreds of billions of dollars from Medicare and Medicaid. And that same bill also opened the door for privatizing Medicare. And so, this was long before Trump came on the scene. So in other words, the attacks on Medicare and Medicaid and all the social assistance programs that the labor movement won through militant labor struggle in previous decades, all of these programs have been under attack from both the Democratic and Republican parties, because both these parties, despite whatever differences they might have, they both represent the interests of the billionaires and multimillionaires. In other words, they are capitalist parties. In fact, they are the two most powerful parties of global capitalism. And so these attacks have been bipartisan. So that's one of the first things he did, which was slash funding for Medicare and Medicaid. And then he also voted for bills like the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, which ended up, which was specifically geared to deregulating big banks. And as we know, the deregulation bills played a huge role in triggering the 2008 Great Recession, which was devastating, absolutely devastating for tens of millions of American working class, middle class, poor families. And so he was responsible for that. And then in the wake of the Great Recession, Adam Smith also voted to bail out the big banks and the billionaires and multimillionaires, leaving tens of millions of working families in the lurch. And so, he has been doing the exact opposite of what working people need, which is actually he's been one of the Congress people and one of the Democrats who's actively allowed the attacks on American working class living standards. And he has also cut tens of billions of dollars from publicly owned affordable housing. So he has done exact opposite of everything that he now claims. Now he's talking about uh, talking about, maybe we should have lower rents. He just recently put out a tweet that said, oh, maybe we should have $15 an hour national minimum wage. You know what the national minimum wage is today? It's $7.25, and it hasn't been changed for 20 years. And so this guy has been in Congress for 29 years. What has he done all this time? What he has done is made sure with every fiber of his being that working people lose ground year after year for the 29 years that he's been in office. But why is he saying these things now? Because he is running scared from our campaign, because our campaign is the strongest ever challenge by orders of magnitude that this guy has ever faced in his 29-year career. We have raised over $700,000 as an independent campaign, and we have 8.5 times more donors in our district than he does. I mean, this is a very popular campaign. Obviously, as I said, we have a lot of obstacles in our path, and we are fighting to get out every vote. But the strength of our campaign can be seen from the fact that Adam Smith is running scared and trying to, he's scrambling to launder his blood-drenched and pro-billionaire record. And so it is our task, our moral and political duty, to not allow him to launder his record and make sure that working people understand that this guy should really be on trial for war crimes, but the smallest price that he should be made to pay is to be thrown out of office. And it is, it's happening at a moment when tens of millions of people are angry about the war, angry about the genocide, about the cost of living crisis. We are seeing already, that seemingly invincible incumbents have been toppled in the Democratic primaries in New York and in Colorado. And all of these incumbents are exactly like Adam Smith. They've spent decades being a supporter, active supporter of the Zionist agenda and the pro-billionaire agenda. And now there's a reckoning for them. So let's make sure that the reckoning comes for Adam Smith also.
And on Adam's website, he's very big on better oversight for national defense. But I believe you would like to do a little bit more than just simply better oversight when it comes to the United States military.
Not only that, I mean, obviously, we, rather than spend $1 trillion in bloodshed and slaughter and genocide and supporting the apartheid, violent occupation and settlements of Israel, we need those trillions of dollars to be spent for housing, healthcare, education, and jobs for the American families that are struggling. And so that's first of all, it's a night and day difference between this 180-degree opposite of what he's doing. But not only that, it is quite a claim for him to make that he is for what did you say? What did you say he claims? What was the term you said?
Better oversight.
Better oversight. Mm-hmm. This guy has, if there's all this, you can see from the way he has spoken. I mean, until he was threatened by our campaign, how he has furthered the interests of specific corporations like SpaceX, Elon Musk's SpaceX, and Palantir. He has talked about how these companies are actually really good and they should be given money and so on. And so it's the exact opposite of oversight. It's actually one of the guys who has allowed these corporations, these billionaires, to get more and more contracts. And in reality, it's not only him. This is the problem. That is why I'm an independent, because when Adam Smith is particularly villainous, his track record is particularly heinous, but at the same time, the Democratic Party as a whole is a pro-billionaire, pro-war party, just like the Republicans are. And so just to give an example, the bills that were passed in 2024 to fund the genocide in Gaza, they were voted, they were approved not only by Republicans, but also by Democrats. In fact, there was a bill in 2024 that 173 Democrats voted yes on, which gave tens of billions of dollars for the genocide in Gaza and also banned United Nations food aid for Gaza at a time when there were reports of catastrophic levels of mass starvation. And I think half of the Congressional Progressive Democrats caucus also voted for that bill. So in reality, if we are serious, if working people are serious about ending the genocide, about fighting against the apartheid state of Israel and ending the violent occupation, which is just unspeakable. It's carrying out unspeakable horrors on the Palestinian people, on Lebanese, Yemeni, Iraqi, Irani people. So many people are being slaughtered. If we are serious about ending all of this, about ending military aid to Israel, about having funding not for war but for our needs of working class people, if we're serious about any of this, then we will need to build independent mass movements with leadership that is clear, that you cannot rely on the Democratic or Republican Party. That is why it's not incidental that I'm running as an independent. It is the core part of why we need independent politics. And that's why it will be important for us to win the election. And that is why I urge people to support our effort to get out the vote in the primary so that we can advance to the November election. If we advance to the November election, then it will be a head-to-head match between Adam Smith and our campaign. It will be the most electrifying race in the nation. I can promise you that. And we will have a real shot to defeat Adam Smith. And a defeat for Adam Smith is not just a defeat for Adam Smith, it is also a defeat for the billionaire class. And as an independent, I've shown my track record on the Seattle City Council that rather than use my office to build my own career and make some deals with the Democratic Party and generally sell out the working class, except for some incremental gains here and there, I actually used my office in the exact opposite way, meaning turning outward and using my office as a platform for social struggle, for building movements. That is how we won the nation's highest minimum wage. We defeated Jeff Bezos and won the Amazon tax. We defeated corporate landlords, billionaire landlords repeatedly, and won a whole fleet of renters' rights that are unparalleled in most cities. We won all of that because I used my office as an organ of working class fight back. That is how I have pledged to use my congressional office as well if elected. I've pledged that if elected, I will turn my congressional inauguration into a mass rally of 10,000 people in Washington, D.C., and immediately started using my office to build mass movements to end all military aid to Israel and for free healthcare for all, funded by taxing the rich. And why this is especially important also, Conrad, is because if we win this, an office at the congressional level, it will allow me to use my congressional office to mobilize and organize working class people nationally. So in other words, we will have the potential, perhaps for the first time in many, many decades in America, to unite working class people across blue states, red states, purple states on a working class basis. Instead of rather than being divided about did you vote for a Democrat, did you vote for a Republican, instead uniting working class people, regardless of whom you voted for. I don't care whom you voted for. Both parties have sold you out. If you're a working person, whether you're in Washington State or West Virginia or Kentucky or Louisiana or Texas, I don't care where you are. If you are a working class person, you've been sold out by both the Democrats and Republicans, both parties of billionaires. And that is why we have much more in common with one another as working class people. And so my aim will be to use my congressional office, if elected, to unite working people on a class basis so that we can build almighty militant movements to take on the billionaire class, which is what's needed.
And I definitely appreciate the idea of keeping that independent mindset, cultivating a big groundswell of literal public support to show up in DC. But nonetheless, as I have a comment that comes in on the live stream, are there still caucuses that you might still want to work with who already exist in Congress that are very similar to you that might be able to really boost your movement?
Yeah, I mean, the way I use my office is a guide for what we could do if we are elected to Congress, which is that my door was always open for any politician or any other type of leader, whether labor leader or NGO leader or social movement leader. If they wanted to fight alongside me for the demands that I was fighting for, then we were always welcoming, because our approach is what I call non-sectarian, meaning regardless of any other differences, we always put the interests of the working class and of oppressed communities at the center. That's always the priority. And if we can strengthen the movement for working people by uniting with other people, other politicians, other elected officials, then we always do that. And there are many examples from the Seattle City Council where I united with Democratic politicians, Democratic City Council members on renters' rights or workers' rights. But I also have to admit that those instances, while they did exist, were few and far between. They were not the norm. The norm was the Democratic Party politicians fighting tooth and nail against the demands, working class demands that I was fighting on, and working people were fighting for alongside me. So the same principle applies for Congress as well. It's fundamentally no different in that if any of the Congress members is willing to fight for working people, fight to end the wars and the genocide, then absolutely I look forward to that. In fact, it will strengthen the movement if it is not just me in Congress who is doing that. But I can also tell you with 100% clarity that I will never sell out working people in the name of caucusing with other politicians, which is what's happening right now, which is what's been happening right now for decades in Congress, which is why people are so disgusted. I mean, you look at the approval ratings. Trump has a low approval rating, but so do the Democratic and Republican parties also as a whole, because working people are tired of being sold out. And in the name of caucusing and bipartisanship, what is the status quo we have seen? The national minimum wage is $7.25. This is disgraceful. And meanwhile, with the movement building approach that I used in Seattle, we were able to make Seattle the first major city to win the $15 an hour minimum wage. We also won the battle for inflation increases, which is why Seattle's minimum wage right now is the nation's highest at $21.30. Compare that to $7.25. That's what I mean, So all the caucusing and whatever else that the Democrats and Republicans have done in the US Congress, what has it got working class people? I want to see the material gains. Let's look at what material gains have we won. We have not won a minimum wage increase in 20 years. We did not get anything close to universal public health care. We did not even get a public option. We have been sold out on healthcare repeatedly by both Democrats and Republicans. The railroad workers' strike was blocked by both Democrats and Republicans, and it happened under President Biden. And the other thing that happened under Biden was the start of the genocide in Gaza, which is the Holocaust of the 21st century. And so, and as far as the railroad workers' strike was concerned, I should mention that other than Rashida Tlaib, every single House Democrat voted to break the railroad workers' strike. And you can, if you're a socialist, that is absolutely unacceptable, breaking a union strike. And so if you look at the track record of the Democratic Party, the Democratic Party had a majority in the House and the Senate and the White House under Clinton, under Obama, under Biden. What did they do with all these majorities? They could have easily done all kinds of things, right? They could have passed universal public health care, single payer health care. They could have
codified Roe.
Exactly. Yeah, they could have certified Roe, and instead they didn't do that. And then we got the Dobbs ruling, which dismantled abortion rights. And in fact, at that time, you know what I was doing when the Dobbs ruling happened? I fought for and won publicly funded free abortion in Seattle for anybody. You can come from anywhere and get publicly funded abortion rights in Seattle. And that's the kind of fight back you need. And in fact, we have the opposite. Under Clinton, we got the dismantling of the welfare system, all social assistance programs. We got an insane expansion of the mass incarceration system, which is especially racist and anti-poor. And we got military assaults on various countries. We got the similar thing under Obama. And then what did the Obama administration and the Democratic Party do? Made sure that the door was held shut against any kind of even public option for healthcare, let alone single-payer healthcare. And under Biden, we saw the genocide being launched, and they didn't even do small things like repeal Trump's tax cuts for the rich. They didn't do that. They didn't even make the ACA, Obamacare enhanced tax subsidies permanent, knowing full well, which everybody knew, that if Trump was reelected, he and the Republicans would actually repeal the tax subsidies and throw 20 or 22 more million people into turmoil by taking away their healthcare rights. And so, they didn't even do that. The Democrats didn't even do that. So, in other words, the putting our faith in the Democratic and Republican parties has gotten working class people ever worsening living standards, has gotten us more and more wars. And that is why we need independent politics. And that is why this campaign is so important.
I also want to throw up this comment which just came in from Andrea Dixon. Outside of the John Lewis Act, what else is needed? What else do you want to secure Americans' voting rights? Does the solution still include the Supreme Court?
I mean, yes, of course, it includes the Supreme Court as well. I mean, yes, we need the Voting Rights Act, and we also need laws against the gerrymandering of the various districts. We see the disenfranchisement of working class people, but specifically of oppressed minorities, of indigenous people, of black voters, black working class people and poor people, and also immigrants. So for example, a lot of immigrants will not even be told that actually, if you when you once you get your citizenship, you have the right to vote, and here's how you do it. In fact, one of the things we're doing right now, Conrad, in our campaign, is actually making campaign videos for working class people to know that here is how you fill in your ballots, and here is how you put it in. Here are the ballot boxes. Here's how you find out if you don't have a ballot, if you didn't receive a ballot. It's a mail-in ballot state. If you didn't receive a ballot, here's how you go about finding out how to do it, all of that. So absolutely, we need these basic protections. So for example, for democratic rights, we need what's called the For the People Act, which would be a real step forward to end what I was just talking about, the systematic disenfranchisement of poor people, of oppressed communities. Because one of the things that it will do is make voter registration automatic, which means that you will have restored voting rights for people with felony convictions who have already completed their sentence. It will simplify voting by mail. This would be in all states. It will, as I was saying earlier, end partisan gerrymandering at the federal level, and which both parties are notorious for. It would also make the rules for drawing maps uniform nationwide, meaning it would give working people, ordinary people, a chance to review the district maps and provide input. And also it would ban the laundering of campaign funds through front groups. So we need all of this, and we need to fight for what's called the For the People Act, which I just described. But again, if we are to win this, it's not going to be through the Democratic or Republican parties, because both parties use gerrymandering. Both parties use corporate PACs. They both are bankrolled by the Zionist PACs. In fact, we just saw how the Congressional Black Caucus, half of it, I mean, this is the Black Caucus, keep in mind, half of the Congressional Black Caucus members are bankrolled by AIPAC and the Zionist lobby, and they just endorsed the Zionist candidate in the Senate, Michigan Democratic
Stevens.
primary, Haley Stevens. So all of this is shown that both the Democratic and Republican parties they specifically work to ensure that tens of millions of Americans remain disenfranchised and also straitjacketed within the two parties. And that's why for voting rights as well, and for greater democracy, we will need independent working class movements, and we will need these movements to be multiracial along working class lines, because otherwise we will not be able to win if we are all divided across ethnicity and across state and all of that.
And on his website, Adam tells the reader that his dad has a big history in unions and how much he believes America needs better apprenticeships and labor protections. And I'm thinking, is that just him trying to sound like he's more populist? Is that where you come out better yet again?
I mean, look at his record, right? I mean, can you say that his record has actually been pro-union or pro-worker? It's the exact opposite. But you know what he's doing here? I'm glad you read this part, Conrad, because what it shows, it's an illustration of what you see in status quo politics, which is you see candidates running on personal narratives. Was his dad a union member? Yes, he was. But what does that tell you about what Adam Smith has done while in office? Absolutely nothing. In fact, it is specifically misleading, because if you think because his dad was a union member that Adam Smith has been good to union members, then that's actually telling you a lie. So in other words, it's meant to deflect away from the stark reality of his track record, which has been extremely anti-union and anti-worker and anti-poor. So that's why our campaign is so fundamentally different, Conrad, because we are not running on any personal narratives. I don't send out mailers to voters saying, hey, look at my family, look at how how nice and cozy my personal life is, and look at what my mom did and my dad did. I don't talk about those things. I say this is what we are fighting for, and this comes back to your original focus on demands. These are the demands we are fighting for. If you, as a working class person, want that, then join us and vote for us and help us build movements that will actually win these victories. That is our campaign's appeal is fundamentally different than all of these campaigns that run on personal narratives and also ultimately are meant to make their own careers. Adam Smith doesn't give a flying fuck about working class people. He is there to make his own career and to make sure that he keeps getting reelected. And for the first time in 30 years, the guy has something to sweat about. So let's make that sweat even more concrete by making sure that we take this campaign into the November election so that we can actually build a real fight to defeat Adam Smith and elect the first ever revolutionary socialist to the US Congress. And this is the truth, Conrad, that if I were elected, that would be, as I said, the first ever revolutionary socialist to the US Congress. That will be nothing short of a political earthquake. It would be a
Huge.
political earthquake. It would be huge. It would be international viral news, and it would give us, meaning working people, a serious platform from which to organize nationwide movements. And it will need to be rank and file driven. And you know why? Because the leaders of many unions have endorsed Adam Smith, which is absolutely shameful. It's shameful that when union members are fighting against a genocide and are struggling to make ends meet, the leaders of the Washington State Labor Council, the the National Education Association, the Washington Federation of State Employees, the IFPTE, which is the parent union of the Union of Engineers, and Boeing Corporation. These are massive unions. These are very important unions whose leaderships, not the rank and file members, but the leaderships have endorsed Adam Smith. This is absolutely shameful. And in contrast, our campaign has, if you look at who's canvassing for our campaign, and we have just enormous numbers canvassing every day, multiple times a day, it's union members, it's non-unionized workers, it's people who are fighting against the genocide, ordinary people, tech workers, baristas, engineers at Boeing, machinists at Boeing. All of these workers are actually campaigning for our campaign because they completely disagree with the decision of their leadership, undemocratic decisions of endorsing a warmonger like Adam Smith.
I also want to throw up this comment that I got from a libertarian watcher here in Virginia, Mr. Eric Bowling, who is had a little bit of a question regarding raising the minimum wage as high as 30, I believe, in big cities for you, and 25 nationwide. He believes that raising the minimum wage has the potential to accelerate automation and limit job access to low-skilled workers, especially in rural areas. So he wants to know how you want to plan to address that possibility.
I mean, there is automation happening. Of course, you have the whole invasion by AI against jobs, all of that. But it's not because of minimum wage increases. I mean, I can tell you as an economist, I'm an economist myself, and I've looked into this issue very deeply and clearly. And there is absolutely no statistical evidence that shows that minimum wage increases cause, the automation is happening, but that's happening independently. It's not because of the minimum wage that people lose their jobs. There's no such evidence. In fact, just to give you a concrete example, when we were fighting for $15 an hour minimum wage in Seattle, there was a lot of fear mongering along those lines. Like, the very people who Kshama Sawant wants to benefit, the poorest workers, they're the ones who would lose their jobs, and that would be disastrous and apocalyptic and lights out Seattle and all of that. You know what actually happened is when we raised the wage in Seattle, when we won that movement victory, the businesses and corporations just outside Seattle, like outside the periphery of Seattle, they were suddenly competing for workers who were getting far better wages inside Seattle. And even before the law changed statewide, they were forced to increase wages because they were competing for workers who were getting better wages in Seattle. So in other words, actually, the evidence shows the exact opposite, that in fact there's a contagious effect, that if workers fight for minimum wage increases in one region, it actually provides momentum. It's not all automatic, but it provides momentum for wage increases in other places. Same with taxes on the rich. We're always told, well, the rich will leave and so on and so forth. Yes, of course, the rich have the ability to do that, and they will also extort things from us. But the point is that the response to that type of extortion, and this applies to automation as well, the response to all of these threats to our living standards cannot be for us to hunker down and not fight for better things, because those things are going to happen anyway. So that's my point. Whether or not we fight for a minimum wage increase, that automation, that's happening anyway, because the billionaires and multimillionaires will do whatever they need to for their bottom line. And the reason AI has now become central to everything, every aspect of the economy, all the way from ICE terror and war to the way healthcare is being dispensed, the reason AI is now everywhere, ubiquitous, is because AI is the new frontier of profit making for the billionaires. That is what dictates what kind of technology is deployed, or what kind of technology is, what kind of technology is developed in the under capitalism. It's not determined by minimum wage increases or by what's good for society. It's all determined by what is good for the pocketbook, the profits of the billionaires. So my point is that even if we didn't fight for any minimum wage increases, that is not going to stop automation. That is not going to stop jobs being destroyed by AI. Our only option is to actually go on class war back against the billionaires on every front. Meaning, our only option outside, if you don't want falling living standards and increased misery, is actually to do the opposite, which is fight for minimum wage increases, fight to tax the rich and fund affordable housing, healthcare, fight for universal healthcare funded by taxing the rich, fight to shut down the data centers, stop the mass layoffs, fight to win a public sector living wage jobs guarantee, fight to win a minimum wage increase in every big city. Because the whole point is that as long as there is a workforce, a labor force that is more desperate, that is willing and who are willing to work for lower wages, as long as the billionaires find that, they will go there. So the only option is not for us to accept a race to the bottom everywhere, but in fact, punching back on the billionaires everywhere. So fighting for minimum wage increases everywhere, fighting for taxes on the rich everywhere. And that's exactly what happened when we fought for 15. All these corporate media, the business owners, the billionaires, they were fear mongering about how, oh my God, if Seattle gets 15, it will be disastrous for workers, it will be disastrous for small businesses. There's no such thing that happened. In fact, the opposite happened. I already gave you one example of the businesses right outside Seattle, but it was much more than that. The 15 Now movement that I launched here in Seattle, that went nationwide. And there were 15 Now campaigns in city after city after city. And after we won 15 here, it was won in cities across the nation, and tens of millions of workers since then. I mean, when we won this in 2014, and so in the last 12 years, tens of millions of workers have won substantial wage increases, which obviously are not enough, but have been a lifeline as they get pummeled by cost of living increases. And so it's the exact opposite of what we are told happened, which is that actually more people win victories, and that is the approach we should use.
I also want to follow up because you mentioned how you want to go after data centers as well. That follows up on AI and what they're doing. Virginia is a bit of an AI and data center hub, but it's more than just going after the big springing up of data centers. It's their effect on the environment. So with that knowing, I got another question here. What do you generally want to do about data centers nationwide as you're going to Congress and other energy concerns for ratepayers?
Yeah, I mean, yes, this is especially a problem in Virginia because, yeah, Virginia is actually now a global hub of data centers, and it is such a devastating impact on the lives of the people that live in the vicinity of these data centers. And obviously energy, utility prices going up, the problems with water supply, the quality of water supply, the noise pollution, all of that is just a massive hit on the quality of life for the people who live there. And so, and not just in Virginia, but I'm just, Virginia is an outlier because of quite how much of a data center hub it has become. And so, first of all, we need mass movements against these data centers. I mean, just to give you a concrete example, Workers Strike Back, the organization that I founded, it has members across the nation, and our members have been part of movements, local movements against data centers in Midwestern cities like Pine Hill, Minnesota, and Pekin, Illinois. I mean, these are small cities. Probably a lot of the working class people who became part of this movement have never been politically active before this. But as the Republicans and the Democrats decided to place a data center in their neighborhoods, people started fighting back. And that's really, it really shows that even the most apolitical people will be propelled into struggle sooner or later if their conditions are affecting them. And so it's actually, it's a very optimistic thing that working people will fight back. I mean, look, Mormons in Utah have been fighting against the data centers. And when that happens, that you've got a unifying fight in our hands, for the working class. So it's really one of the most potentially one of the struggles that has the most potential for uniting working class people across red and blue states, which is the fight against the data centers. So I think part of what needs to happen is a nationwide moratorium, like we need to stop the data centers. And that's a concrete thing that I have pledged to fight for if we win this congressional election. And in addition to that, of course, we have to deal with the climate catastrophe and the climate of effects of not just the data centers, but overall. So we need to actually end the use of fossil fuel and retool companies to have renewable energy. And not all of that is going to happen just by winning a congressional election. But what can happen by electing a revolutionary socialist to Congress is that we can actually, it can be a little bit of a parting of the waters where we can actually build momentum to have huge movements of millions of working class people moving into action, which is what we will need to win any of these things. So, stopping the data centers is a concrete thing that we can win if we win this election in the Congress. The other thing that we can win is actually making sure that there is a moratorium and any increase on utility rates, and actually for the neighborhoods that have experienced utility increases because of the data centers, to push back against that, to actually go back to the old rates and pre-data center rates, and make the billionaires who are profiting from the data centers, make them pay for those increases. So all of this is possible. I don't want people to think that it's going to be easy. Of course, it's not going to be easy, because just think about it, right? We are up against the billionaires who have tens of trillions of dollars of wealth, which also comes with unimaginable political power and clout. We are going up against them. But what we do have on our side is that we are so many of us and they are so few of them. And that is why I keep emphasizing that the biggest role that an elected office like mine could play is bringing together movements of working class people. Because what the billionaires fear is not just me alone. What they fear is me being elected and mobilizing millions of Americans. That is what they fear.
And I also want to note in my research for Adam's site and interviews of his that you're right to point out that he, and I believe there's another Democrat in your race right now, Melissa Chaudhary, who they don't mention the needs of the Black community at all. So not only do you acknowledge what the group needs, you're running on it entirely. So what are your ideas?
Are you saying about the Black community specifically?
And how to improve it?
Okay, yes. First of all, you're totally right, Conrad, that ours is the only campaign that is even talking about the specific needs of the Black community. And, first of all, we're saying that we need to acknowledge that American capitalism was itself built on the exploitation of enslaved Black people and also the genocide of indigenous people. That was the basis of building capitalism. So there is no way that the billionaires and multimillionaires, especially the old money guys, the people who made money in those times, that they would have made money without the horrors of slavery and Jim Crow and segregation as our the page that you're showing right now, that as our page talks about all of that. And and so we are, first of all, fighting for reparations for Black working class and poor people, funded by taxing the rich. That's very important to mention, that it is, that we need to tax the billionaires and multimillionaires to make sure that these reparations are given. And also, and as it says that, that the top 1% has a shocking $55 trillion of wealth. And then in addition to that, we need massive investments, historically high investments in the Black communities, including for affordable housing, for rent control, for safe neighborhoods, for public schools. I mean, if you look at the funding, for example, of public schools, overall, public schools are underfunded, and the children of working class people are, really at a, they're suffering in the context of having deeply underfunded public schools. The teachers are suffering, there's always a constant attack on the teachers union, all of this. But these attacks are specifically acute in neighborhoods that are mostly Black and working class. And so I think specifically targeting funding for public schools for Black neighborhoods is extremely crucial. And housing is extremely important as well. And I just wanted to give you a concrete example of reparations that we've already won. On the Seattle City Council, as I mentioned earlier, we won the Amazon tax. We defeated both the billionaires like Jeff Bezos and also the Democratic Party politicians who were very opposed to the Amazon tax. We won that, and that it's been raising. We won it in 2020, and since then, annually, it raises hundreds of millions of dollars every year by taxing the wealthiest corporations to fund affordable housing. But within that, we won a specific pool of funds taxing corporations like Amazon to build housing for Black working class and poor people to return, like a right to return, in the sense that many of them were racially redlined, and then now in the modern times economically redlined, meaning the rents are so high that they're not able to afford to live in the city. And so we're building publicly owned affordable housing in these neighborhoods. Actually, some of the homes that are going up is just a few blocks from where I live, in Seattle's Central District, which is a historically Black Central District. And so this is a concrete example of how we can tax the wealthy and actually make publicly owned, rent-controlled, affordable housing possible for the Black community and also for the working class as a whole. And obviously, it goes beyond that. It's also, we have to end mass incarceration, banning for-profit prisons, and stopping the forced, unpaid, and low-wage prison labor, which is really just, this is a conduit for profits for the super wealthy. I mean, it's absolutely obscene how people in prison, inmates are exploited. It's like a modern day slavery, really.
And your proximity to not only doing well, but a victory this upcoming Tuesday is important. It could shake up a lot of the national politic here. And it reminds me, of course, of 2018 when the Justice Democrats won AOC and others. But in that vein, the last question I have that comes from the feed is in regards to the possibility that, the American people have before been sort of fooled by fake populists. And you have a great track record, but how can we trust that you won't go the way of AOC when you're in office?
Well, I think the track record is what shows you that it won't go the way of AOC. I mean, if you remember what AOC said was that when she was running in 2018, and I supported her campaign, and we actually, our members in New York campaigned for her. She said that it would be better to be a one-term Congress member than to sell out working class people. And we agree with that, except that she didn't carry that out. But everything in our track record shows that we have, it's not only a track record of winning, which we have, but the way we won it. We would not have won the nation's highest minimum wage, the Amazon tax, and all the renters' rights victories that we won by not letting the corporate landlords win a single thing when I was on the Seattle City Council for 10 years. Those victories would not have been possible had I not been completely clear that this is not about my career. This is about the working class, because that is the only way in which we have been able to win. Because in order to win, it took for me to become enemy number one of the billionaire class and the political establishment. And I wear that their hatred of me as a badge of honor, because it's a reminder to me that's an indication that I'm fighting for the working class. And that approach is what we've used throughout. And it's also important to share with your viewers that it's our everything about the way we do it as revolutionary socialists is fundamentally different, in that I didn't wake up. My first city council election campaign was in 2013. I didn't wake up one day and decide I want to run for office. It's the starting point of running for office itself is different for us. We are a democratic organization, my fellow socialists and we democratically discuss and debate. Our starting point is not Kshama wants to run for office. Our starting point is, should we launch an election campaign? Would that be a good avenue for us to build struggle of the working class? And when the answer to that question is yes, we're not an electoral machine. We don't just run election campaigns. We are rooted in movements. And we, like I said, the data center fight back, none of that had any elections to do with it. We are fighting on the ground alongside our fellow working class people. But within that movement building, that we raised the question, would it make sense for us to launch an election campaign? That question is discussed democratically. And also what's discussed democratically is what the program of what the demands should be, who the candidate should be. So in fact, who the candidate should be is a democratically discussed and debated and voted on decision. And to be honest with you, it's unfortunate for me personally that the democratic decision was that I should be the candidate, because given a choice, I wouldn't want to do it. But that's exactly the kind of leader you need. Actually, the working class needs reluctant leaders, because you need people who are clear that we are in this for a working class fight back, which means that as a leader, you're willing to take all the heat from the ruling class and the political establishment in order to be able to never sell out the working class. And that's the kind of track record we have, which is basically unparalleled. I'm saying basically because yes, there are some who have not sold out, but our track record is really virtually unmatched. And so I really urge everybody who's watching this, whether you're in Virginia or on the West Coast or in Washington State, get involved in our campaign. In these last few days, they're crucial. Even though it's just a week left for election date, August 4th, this is the most crucial period in some ways, Conrad, because working class people, it's a mail-in ballot state, so people can vote anytime through August 4th. But the truth is that working people, young people, they all tend to vote later. So if you are watching this and if you are inspired and if you want our campaign to succeed, you can go to kshamasawant.org, our campaign website, and sign up for a phone banking shift, because that also gets out the vote. Phone banking shifts help us get out the vote. And if you're anywhere in the Washington State vicinity and you're watching this, then you should come out. If you're able to drive up or carpool up here to come to a door knocking or tabling shift, like come in person, then you should do that as well. We need your support, and we need to get out every possible vote so that we can be one of the top 2 vote getters to go on and advance to the November election.
And that, I believe, is what I have tonight for you. I want to thank you, Kshama Sawant, so much for coming on tonight to give us why you're running and why it's so important that you win. So not only do I wish you luck, I actually want you to be very successful, not only this Tuesday, but come November. So I want you to shock the political world. And with a very close, maybe second place on Tuesday, because I know he's a heavy favorite, but I want this to be a really good fight going into November. So again, thank you for coming on tonight. Do you have any final words before you head away?
Just to say that the working class has never won anything without an all-out fight. That's what this primary election also is. And so I really, really appreciate you, Conrad, covering this election on your show. And I really hope your viewers get involved, because it's only through a collective fight back that we can win anything. And so without the support of yourself and your viewers, we will not be able to do this. So I appeal to you all to get involved. Let's collectively fight back. We have 1 week. Let's make it count, and let's make sure that we are in the November election.
Indeed. Thank you so much. I hope you have a great night the rest of your night, and we'll stay in touch.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
And this
Take
has been
care.
another great SchezzWho. Hope you guys enjoyed tonight. Thank you for all those comments and questions. Definitely stay tuned because Tuesday might be a good surprise. Hope you guys have a great night.